Hello, everyone, and welcome to another video here on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. This is, in a nutshell, episode 76. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and I'm joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, we're going to do version 2 of our Big Ten basketball power rankings. This video is part 1. Part 2 will be out shortly. But, Joe, we've seen a lot of good things in the league so far. And as the people can see, those are our power rankings from November 4th before the season. We're going to be slightly updating them we're about at the 1/3 mark. So, Joe, last time we did alphabetical order, starting with Illinois. This time, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to start with the Wisconsin Badgers. They are 8-3 on the season, but they have dropped both of their opening games in the Big Ten. They rolled through Arizona before winning the Greenbrier tip-off. But since then, Joe, 3 losses in a row to Michigan at home, Marquette on the road, and Illinois on the road. They weren't expected to be great, as people could see down there in 13th and 14th in our preseason. They shocked everybody by beating a lot of good teams early, and now they've dropped a couple games to good teams. So, Joe, with Wisconsin, is it as simple as water's finding its level here?
I don't think so necessarily, Sean. I think they've just played 3 really good teams. Michigan, up until Tuesday, was one of the hottest teams in the country. I think any away game at Marquette, you can explain that away. And then an away game to Illinois. I think one of the more troubling things is how they've lost 2 of these 3 games. They were there to be won, I thought. And even the Marquette game, to an extent, could have been a lot more competitive down the stretch. But with all that said, Sean, I do think they need more support from some of their supporting cast. Nolan Winters of the world, even Stephen Crow, those guys come back, you expect a lot more out of them, even more minutes. I think their bench needs to be a little better. I do think Max Klesmit's going to have to get out of this funk at some point. That's why I had them at 9th, middle of the pack in the conference. I think it's as simple. It's just a typical Wisconsin team, a team that's good. They'll win a lot of games at the Kohl Center. They might steal a game on the road or two, but ultimately, if you have more talent than them and you're not at the Kohl Center, I'm hard pressed to find out how you wouldn't come away with the victory.
Yeah, I think, Joe, early on, the opponents didn't really expect them to play such a high up-tempo offensive onslaught type of game. That shocked a couple teams, but now that a couple of weeks worth of film is on there, I think that's why they are being slowed up a little bit by these good teams. Now, I agree. I have them in 9th also. I do think they will make the tournament, but sort of the top 10, top 15 team that we thought they might be early on seems like it might be a little bit of a stretch. John Tonji's been awesome, like you said. Blackwell's been great, too. And Klesmit has actually been poor, which you can take an optimistic side of that, and that he won't be that bad for a while. He has been playing better, 22 and 13 in his last 2 games. So perhaps if he gets going, Wisconsin can be a real problem. They are a good offensive team. Tonji gets to the line a ton. They're shooting 35% from 3, 83% from the line. So still, this is a rough stretch that they're going through, and if you checked out our other videos, we have said this 4-game stretch will be tough. A couple things don't go your way, and you're going to lose against good teams. But we both have Wisconsin 9th. All right, Joe, up next, we've got the Washington Huskies. Got first year in the Big Ten. They are 7-3 and 0-2 overall. But, Joe, their 3 losses are their 3 power conference games. A loss on the road to Nevada, on the road to UCLA, and then a big home loss to USC. They start Big Ten play 0-2. Great Osabor's been a great player, 14 points, 9 rebounds per game. But other than that, Joe, they are a little bit short in the talent department. And unfortunately for them, it looks like Danny Sprinkle and the Huskies are headed towards a bottom of the conference finish.
Yeah, Sean, I think outside of Tyler Harris, the supporting cast has been not really poor, but just really unhelpful. I don't want to say it's poor because we weren't expecting a lot out of Danny Sprinkle's first year in Seattle. That's why, Sean, they're in last place for me. I don't think they're going to upset way too many teams. I do think because of Great Osobor, they'll be in a lot of games at home. Definitely USC was not one of them, but I assume they'll pick a few teams off. But I find it hard to believe they'll win any road games away from Seattle, particularly against the traditional Big Ten powers here, or any of the traditional Big Ten schools for that matter.
Yeah, and Joe, if you think about it, they lost big to USC at home, and that's a game on paper that should be one of the more winnable ones. They don't come close, but I think it's a mid-major roster around Great Osobor, and unfortunately for them, that is, the Big Ten is pretty good this year, we think, and unfortunately for them, that's going to be a lot more losses than it is victories. But I still like Danny Sprinkle as a coach, and I think he'll get that program off the ground relatively quickly. Just won't be in year one. All right, Joe, up next we got USC. Eric Musselman down in Los Angeles. The Trojans are 6-4 and 1-1 in the conference. They lost a game to California, St. Mary's, New Mexico, and then a game at home against Oregon, which they led for a lot of and probably should have won. But they did get that big win on the road at Washington, like we just mentioned. So Musselman brings together all of this talent: Desmond Claude, Terrence Williams, Josh Cohen, Matt Noling. And unfortunately, it hasn't really quite meshed as well as people probably expected so far. So what are your thoughts on USC?
Yeah, Sean, that's why I have them toward the bottom at 16. I think this is a great collection of talent. I think Eric Musselman eventually will figure it out. I'll be very honest with you. I don't imagine when we do these again in a month or two how USC would be in 16th. I see them being more, 11 to 14 because they're going to figure it out. But so far, Sean, they've only won one of their major games. I mean, that's not going to get it done. They haven't had guys clicking consistently. It's not just the whole team. It's just been one or two guys of that trio of Claude and T. Will. Some Michigan fans call him T. Will, but I do think he's a capable player. Unfortunately, though, we haven't seen it quite yet from USC, and just a very unimpressive year. 6-4, one semi-respectable win at Washington, who we just eviscerated. So I think the Oregon game was a solid performance, and they could capitalize off that. But man, Sean, it's going to be really tough for them to be in the tournament based on this start.
Yeah, I agree, Joe. This is sort of how Musselman teams have looked over the last couple of years at Arkansas, if you've been paying attention to that. They get all these players from all these different places. They don't mesh early on. Musselman struggles to find a winning formula. And then in February, they're good, and if they're good enough early in the season, they'll get into the tournament and be a problem. And if they're not, they're going to miss the tournament like we saw last year down there in Fayetteville. So I have them in 16th also. Year one in the conference with a brand new team, a coach who's never been in the conference. A lot of factors are stacked against USC here, which I think is unfortunate for them because I have them taking the first spot that misses out on the Big Ten tournament. All right, Joe, go across town to UCLA, your preseason pick to win the conference. And despite an early loss to New Mexico, you're not entirely off the mark. They have not lost since that game, week 2 of the season. They win their first Big Ten game over Washington at home, and then they go on the road and dethrone the previously undefeated Oregon Ducks. So, Joe, your prediction may not have looked so great after a week of college basketball, but it looks a lot better now. Tyler Bilodeau, Eric Daly, Sebastian Mack, all playing pretty well for the Bruins, and then a couple players off the bench still probably have more in the tank. So, Joe, UCLA has been pretty good so far.
I think they've been really good so far. I think New Mexico, maybe that loss isn't as great, but I do think New Mexico's beaten a lot of major teams, not only this year, but since Rick Jr. has been there. So I'm really willing to wipe that loss away, and a lot of people think that's unfair, but based on who they've beaten, based on how they've looked, and really based on the Oregon performance alone, I'm putting UCLA at number 1. Now, I think a lot of people are going to object and really say how their non-conference wins weren't impressive. I'm not going to deny that. One thing I'll say, though, this team has progressed a lot, and winning at Oregon certainly triumphed Michigan's away win at Wisconsin. I think they have the most impressive win. They've been the most impressive team so far in the conference. That's why UCLA is number 1. Balance between Daly, Bilodeau, Mack. They haven't even gotten anything out of the bench yet. Guys like Stefanovic, who I do believe in. Guys like Sky Clark, who I think it's taken him a while to get on. I do think he'll get going eventually. Once that happens, this is going to be a really difficult out. Even guys like Dylan Andrews, Kobe Johnson. I mean, there are so many guys at any given night who could beat you. And even if they just pull their weight, they're a really tough out, Sean.
Yeah, I agree. I think probably half of their players are playing well right now, and they're still looking pretty good. And then on the other hand, Joe, it is year 1 for Mick Cronin in the Big Ten, but I think, as we've sort of said over the episodes here, is that his play style will work in this league. It might not, work in the run and gun SEC or something like that. But that's not where he is. He's in the Big Ten. I think we will see a little bit of beginner's luck here, like Kevin Willard in year one at Maryland. A lot of teams look bad against them, and they've won a lot of games. I think UCLA is a good team. They're far away from everybody, so they should win a majority of their games. They should win all of their games at home, if we're being honest. This year, a lot of the home teams are winning early on. I'm not ruling 10-0 out at home. I do think there'll be a couple games where they lose on the road just from a serious travel, or they're going to be on the road. They're going to be on long road trips here for a week or so. That's just how the scheduling turned out. But I've got them moving up one spot from my original ranking in fifth. I think they might be have a little bit of a limit on the ceiling that they can get to, whereas a couple of the other teams don't. But I do think their floor is pretty high. They're going to win at least 12 games in this league, and I think they're going to be a tough out for whoever gets them in the tournament. All right, Joe, we'll flip the coast back over to New Jersey. We've got the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Not the defensive masterclass that we usually see from Rutgers, but it's because they have two five-star freshmen who will be top 5 picks in the NBA draft. That's Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. Dylan Harper, 23.5 points per game so far, Joe. He's definitely been the best freshman in this league, maybe even in the country. And Ace Bailey, too, 17.5 points per game. The performances from those two have been great. The performances from the rest of the team, not so much. They are 6-4, 1-1 in the Big Ten. They did go out to Kennesaw State as their first true road game, where they lost that. Down by 20, they almost came back. And then they go to the Players Era Festival in Vegas. They go 1-2 with losses to Alabama and Texas A&M, but they were right there in both those games, Joe. And then they go on the road to Ohio State, lose handily, and then they come back home against Penn State and beat them. So, Joe, Rutgers is a really, really interesting one where you see where they'll be here, because we've seen a lot of good things, but it hasn't really translated into W's.
Yeah, Sean, I think the combo of the two freshmen is something Steve Pikiell's never really had to deal with. I think he's more of a program builder, not necessarily got a collector of talent like he's been this year. I do think that some of the production from guys off the bench has been disappointing, particularly Tyson Acuff or PJ Hayes. I think they need a lot more from that part of the team. I do think their performances against Texas A&M and Alabama were really encouraging. Those are two
right there. They're right
there. Two damn good teams, and they really should have won at least one of those games. I think their win against Penn State showed a lot. I think Penn State's been one of the more surprising and hot teams in this conference. And the fact they beat them consistently kind of squandering leads but getting it back up has been really good. I don't think as of now they're into the tournament, but I do think if they defend home like they have in the Steve Pikiell era and they pick off a few road games, they certainly can be a tournament team. Sean, right now Rutgers for me is 15th in the conference. I think like USC, they could rise. I can't put them above teams that have won games against really good teams, like some we're going to feature on this episode. So 15 for Rutgers, but I do think, like USC, they can jump. But I put Rutgers' ability to jump as a lot higher than Eric Musselman's squad.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more optimistic on them, Joe, just because, like you said, Pikiell is usually not used to this much roster turnover, and almost everyone is new. Jeremiah Williams is back, but off the Ogbole, the big guy, he's been there too. But I think the defense might get a little better as the season goes along, just because Hayes is a transfer, Acuff is a transfer, Durkak is a transfer, and then you have a bunch of freshmen playing: Somerville, Bailey, and Harper. I just think getting to these guys will be spending a lot more time together as it gets real cold here in New Jersey, and I think team chemistry wise might boost their defense a little bit more. I have them in 12th. I think they still haven't been as good as we probably thought they'd be. But like you said, I think they probably have one of the biggest range of outcomes here with how good their superstars are. And the win at home against Penn State was really important, Joe. They were reeling. Penn State was rolling, and they got the job done. They were up big and held on barely, but a win is a win. All right, Joe, up next, we're going to go to Indiana to West Lafayette, the national runner-ups from a year ago, the Purdue Boilermakers. Sit at 8-2 overall and 1-1 in the conference. As of this recording, their first big game was a nice home win at Mackey against Alabama. Then they did sort of get beat pretty good on the road at Marquette. They win the Rady's Children's Invitational with victories over NC State and a ranked Ole Miss team. They go on the road to Penn State, lose by 11. But, Joe, that was a game that was way, way more lopsided than that. I think Penn State led by 28 in the second half. And then Purdue gets the job done against Maryland at home. So, Joe, maybe a little more of an up and down Purdue than we thought, but still they've proven that they can win big games on their home floor. Where do you have Purdue?
Sean, right now I have the Purdue Boilermakers in fourth. That's going to raise the eyebrows of a lot of people, especially after the Alabama and the Ole Miss one. I think that's a really good win. As is Maryland, so why rate them so low? I think a lot of their superstars haven't clicked in unison, or that's been Trey Coppin-Red's been outstanding, and I think Braden Smith's still done a good job leading the offense. It's really the guys like Fletcher Lawyer, Miles Colvin, Camden Heide. I think they need more from some of those guys to really win the conference again. I think the Penn State game kind of exposed a lot of their weaknesses, on offense, turning the ball over, something they don't really do a lot. And the fact that's happened kind of gives me pause that they'll repeat. I do think they're a top four team in this conference. I say all this negative stuff. They're still a great team. They've beaten some great teams. When they shoot the ball well, they're impossible to guard, and they're frankly impossible to beat. But as of now, going to need to see a little more from Purdue to put them into the top two, which is where I think they should be. But they're number 4 right now.
I've got them one spot higher in third, Joe. Like you said, I just think the floor is a little bit lower than it's been over the years. When they're rolling at home, I mean, they took it to that Alabama team, and Alabama is really good if the viewers don't know. At home, I think they're going to win probably every game at Mackey, and on the road against athletic teams, I think they're going to struggle. I mean, we saw it with Marquette. They kind of ran them out of the gym, and then sort of the same thing with Penn State. I mean, neither of those games are close. You're going to need the role players to step up. Like, every team can say that. But if for them to win enough road games, I think to win this league, they've got to have somebody really step up. Because Kaufman, Wren, and Braden Smith are playing pretty good. And they're not even close in some of these road games. So I have them third. I do think they do probably figure it out. Win 4 or 5 road games, which, might be one of the best in this league. But unfortunately, I do think they're floor, they're low. They'll have some puzzling losses, like the Penn State one, and that's just because they'll struggle with a little bit of athleticism. All right, up next, Joe, we have got Penn State, the Nittany Lions, predicted last by me, second to last by you, and that might be the most wrong that we've ever been in one of these power rankings episodes. Penn State's been awesome. Their offense started off great. They go down to the Sunshine Slam. They take Clemson all the way down to the wire. They do end up losing it. But they have been covering just about every analytical or betting spread in their bye games. And then, of course, the Purdue victory, like we just mentioned when we were talking about Purdue. That one, should have been a 25-point win. And then a tough loss on the road at the Rack. So, Joe, Penn State has been incredibly impressive in year 2 for Mike Rhodes.
Yeah, Sean, I think they've been – the fact that they're even in a discussion to be middle of the pack in the conference, which is, by the way, meaning you're going to make the NCAA tournament's a huge accomplishment for them. Like we said, I think you're a big Ace Baldwin fan. It's hard not to be. You won't be when he plays against your team. But other than that, it's really hard to dismiss anything they've done, especially with some of the returners they've produced. Sean, I have Penn State in 11th. The real reason I'm a little critical of them is they haven't really played a great non-conference schedule. They did play Clemson pretty close, but outside the Purdue one, what's their marquee win? I think Rutgers was an encouraging side. They didn't get blown out in that game, so I think Rutgers had a few chances to really extend that lead, and Penn State didn't let it happen. I think maybe 8 or 9 conference wins is on the table for the Nittany Lions, something I didn't think I'd be saying. So Penn State in 11th. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've got them one spot higher, Joe. Not too different there. At home, their good is really good. Like we said when we were previewing that Purdue game, they don't have a super deep rotation, but they've gotten everybody to play well a lot out of those 6 or 7 players. I think they're a little bit of a matchup issue with a couple of their guys. Zach Hicks still shoots a lot of threes. Baldwin's the best on-ball defender in the country. And then you get, Puff Johnson, DeLeon, Nick Kern. I mean, these guys have played pretty big minutes for them, and they're all scoring in double figures. So they have 6 players in double figures. That is something that will there's 38% from 3. They're shooting it well. I think, had they beat Rutgers there, Joe, I think we're talking about a team that's probably in the top 25. Now, they didn't, and I do think that brings them, back to the middle of the pack in a good place to make the tournament, but still, they've got some things to take care of. They do have 3 non-conference games coming up, none of which they should really be challenged in. They have a neutral court game against Drexel at the Wells Fargo Center. Penn and Coppin State, they should win those. And then when they get back into Big Ten play, Joe, Northwestern, Indiana, and then Illinois, Oregon, and then Michigan State. So 5 tough games out of the break there. But I think this Penn State team could go a number of different ways, and I've been impressed with them so far. We thought they'd struggle, and they've really done anything but. All right, Joe, up next, back to the West Coast. The Oregon Ducks were one of the last teams in the country that was undefeated until UCLA went into their house and beat them, but they're 9-1. They win the Players Era Festival in Vegas with wins over Texas A&M, San Diego State, and Alabama. They win on the road at USC despite really struggling that whole game. And then it looked like they were going to win that game against UCLA for a second with Jackson Shellstad hitting a huge 3. But it was Dylan Andrews who banked it home with less than a second to go for UCLA to steal that one. But, Joe, Oregon, we thought would be pretty good. As the viewers can see there, we had them preseason ranked in 8th. But, Joe, impressive so far from the Ducks.
Yeah, Sean, I think they have 6 guys that could produce on any night, and they all do it consistently, whether it's Nate Biddle, Jackson Shellstad, TJ Bamba, even guys like Jadrian Tracy. I think they're a really impressive team. I think Dana Altman is going to have a lot of success in year 1, particularly since a lot of teams are not used to playing them. We haven't really seen that on full display as their 2 games have been against former Pac-12 teams, but you look at the teams they beat. Even the win at Oregon State is really impressive. In terms of resumes in this conference, it's really hard to say Oregon's have one of the top 3 resumes, let alone team in the conference. So, with all that said, Sean, I put Oregon in second. I know it's kind of blasphemous to put 2 non-Big Ten teams there, but I think they've certainly earned it. That's why I got Oregon in second in my power rankings.
I am impressed with them, Joe, but I'm a little bit lower on them. I think they're pretty lucky to win that Alabama game in Vegas. A lot of things went their way late, and they play in a lot of close games, and they did get snake bit by UCLA because they didn't put them away there. They had a couple opportunities. I think Shellstad was my pick for Player of the Year. He's probably capable of more than he's producing. 11 points a game, but on 35% shooting and 28% from 3. I think he'll improve. I just think we might see sort of a water finding its level situation with Oregon here in a couple weeks like we saw with Wisconsin. So I've got them down all the way in 7th, but I still think that they're a really good team, probably a top 25 team. I just think they might get a little snake bit if they are not able to put away these games earlier. All right, Joe, the last team here that we're going to talk about in part 1 of our power rankings, and it's the Ohio State Buckeyes. They opened the season with a nice victory against Texas in Las Vegas, and then a loss to Texas A&M on the road that was never really close, a home loss to the Pitt Panthers on a rather lucky buzzer-beating 3, a huge loss on the road in College Park to Maryland by the score of 83-59, and then a convincing 14-point win against Rutgers at home. Aaron Bradshaw did leave the team for personal reasons, but he is back, which is big for their front court. But, Joe, a lot of question marks still around Ohio State.
Yeah, Sean, I think this is a team that's going to win a majority of their home games and not win any road games, maybe one or two against a really bad team. Uh, and I think it's because they're kind of like Iowa in the sense that they could score a lot. They don't play defense, and they do a decent enough job not turning the ball over, I think. But aside from that, this is a team that's very and this isn't me being down on Jake Diebler in year one. They're recruiting well. I think John Mobley Jr. is going to be a problem for years to come in this conference, and he'll stay in Ohio because he's from Ohio. But this is a team that's not really going to scare you unless you have to go on the road. So I don't know what to make too much of them. I think the Texas win really helps them. I think that Pitt loss is going to hurt them, not so much into not making the tournament, but if we do have that conversation, that's going to be one circled. I have Ohio State in 12th, one spot below Penn State. Again, I think they are what they are. I think they're a great offensive team, but if that doesn't amount to anything on a given night, they're going to lose the game, even if that's at home against any team that's even like slightly below their talent, let alone above it. So give me the Buckeyes in 12th place. I do think they're probably one of the last teams into the tournament, but they have a lot to figure out. But I do think if they sharpen up that defense and Bruce Thornton becomes even more explosive, it's a team to watch out for.
Yeah, Joe, I'm a little bit lower on them. I've got them down in 15th. I think there's a couple of definitely question marks around their team. When Diebler came in last year, they really made a lot of shots and didn't defend, and they made enough shots to win. And I think that's sort of happening again. They shot it really well early, and then I think the defense is an issue. Their size is really an issue, even with Bradshaw in there. I think there'll be some Big Ten teams that flat out just will punk them inside and win the game. And then they're even with Bradshaw, they're still not the deepest team. Mobley is really good off the bench. He should probably get more minutes than he's getting. But they're shooting 42% from three, Joe, over 50% from the field, and still, they're still losing their. The Texas A&M game was a convincing loss on the road. The Maryland game was a convincing loss on the road. I think they lose a number of games away from Value City Arena and probably do get beat a couple times at home. But, Joe, here's another reason why I'm a little bit lower on them. They've got two huge games before Big Ten play resumes. They play Auburn in Georgia. You'd expect that to be a heavily Auburn tilted crowd. And then they play Kentucky in New York. Joe, I think those teams are really good, and they might sort of just outclass Ohio State. And that might be a little bit of a wake-up call that there's levels, and I don't think they're there. And with a couple of the things that we've seen defensively, I'm a little bit worried for Ohio State right now. So that's why I've got them down there in 15th. But, the team that'll be in 17th will be the same team for the both of us. I think there is a pretty big gap between 16th and 15th. I think 15 of the 18 teams think that they can still make the tournament. Ohio State certainly could still. They have that Texas win on a neutral, and if they get one of these Auburn or Kentucky games, well then they might be ranked again. But that is it for part one of our power rankings. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and be sure to check out part two as Joe and I fill out the rest of this list.